It was close to midnight in the city. The subway station echoed with hurried footsteps, the kind that only appear when people are desperate to catch the last train home. The walls were damp from the rain outside. The lights above flickered with tired hums, and the air carried the restless energy of dozens of strangers waiting for one more ride before the night swallowed them whole. Then the moment shattered. From the far entrance, three men burst inside. Their faces were hidden under dark masks, their movements sharp, dangerous. One of them slammed a metal pipe against a bench, the sound echoing like thunder across the platform. Another brandished a knife, its blade catching the sickly yellow light. Panic ignited instantly. Bags dropped. Coffee cups spilled. People scattered like frightened birds. Mothers clutched their children. Suits and ties tripped over their polished shoes, scrambling for safety. The station that once buzzed with the ordinary rhythm of life was now chaos incarnate. But in the middle of it all, one man didn't move. His name was Daniel Hayes. Worn jacket, grease-stained hands, a face carved with lines of exhaustion. He wasn't a soldier, wasn't a fighter, wasn't anyone special in the eyes of the world. But in that moment, he stood like a mountain while the rest of the world collapsed around him. At his side, clinging tightly to his hand, was a little girl. Her name was Lily, just 7 years old. Her wide brown eyes shimmered with fear as she looked up at her father. She wanted to run, like everyone else. But when she saw his face, calm and unshaken, something inside her stilled. Because Daniel wasn't just a man. He was her dad, and dads don't run. Daniel's story had always been one of endurance. 5 years ago, life had stripped him bare. His wife, the love of his youth, passed away during childbirth. What should have been the happiest day of his life became the darkest. He was left with nothing but hospital bills, grief, and the fragile miracle of a newborn in his arms. Everyone told him it would be impossible. "Give her to foster care," some whispered. "You can't raise a baby on your own." But Daniel never wavered. With shaking hands and tear-stained eyes, he promised his daughter one thing the night she was born. "No matter what, Lily, I'll always stay." Life since then had been merciless. He worked double shifts at a local garage, fixing cars while his own hands bled with cuts and burns. He barely slept. Bills stacked higher than his paychecks. There were nights he skipped dinner just so Lily could eat an extra slice of bread. But through it all, he smiled for her. He read bedtime stories until she drifted off. He clapped the loudest at her kindergarten recitals. He brushed her hair every morning before school, though his clumsy fingers always left uneven braids. To the world, Daniel Hayes was just a struggling mechanic, but to Lily, he was everything. And now, standing in that subway station, danger closing in, Daniel felt every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every promise he ever made, rushing back to him. His body ached to run. His mind screamed to hide. But his heart only knew one thing: protect. And when his eyes caught sight of a woman, a young nurse frozen behind a pillar, trapped as the masked men drew closer, Daniel knew his night was far from over. So the subway echoed with the sharp clang of metal and the terrified cries of strangers. Three masked men fanned out across the platform, their voices rough and commanding. "Stay down," one barked, swinging his knife toward a cowering passenger. Another smashed a glass sign with his pipe, the shards scattering across the floor like falling stars. People ran. People screamed. But not everyone made it. But behind a cracked pillar stood a young woman, her uniform wrinkled from a long shift, a hospital ID badge still clipped to her chest. She was a nurse, and in her hands she clutched a medical bag so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her lips trembled as the men turned their eyes on her. The tallest of them sneered beneath his mask. "There," he muttered. "She saw us." "Get her!" The men started toward her, step by step, boots slamming against the tiles. The crowd gave way, no one daring to step in. Everyone turned their backs, hoping not to be noticed. Everyone, except Daniel. He saw her fear. He saw her frozen body unable to move. And without a second thought, Daniel bent down to his daughter. "Lily," he whispered, voice steady though his chest pounded, "hide behind the bench." Don't move until I come back. Do you understand? Her little lips quivered. But Dad, he squeezed her shoulders, his tired eyes burning with a father's fire. Do you trust me? She swallowed hard and nodded. Daniel stood tall. Every bone in his body screamed at him to stay with his daughter. Every fear he ever buried roared to the surface. But courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is stepping forward anyway. He walked toward the attackers. The first man laughed. What's this? A hero? He mocked. Go home, old man. Daniel didn't flinch. His voice was calm, but carried the weight of steel. Leave her. Take me instead. The men lunged. The knife swung toward his chest. But Daniel grabbed the man's wrist midair, twisting with every ounce of strength in his arms. The blade clattered to the ground. Gasps rippled through the station. The second attacker raised his pipe. Daniel shoved the first man back and braced himself. The metal slammed against his shoulder. Pain tore through him, but he didn't fall. His knees buckled, yet his body stayed between the nurse and the danger. The nurse gasped. Her eyes flooded with tears. He shielded her with his frame, arms out like a human wall. The third man snarled and reached for her bag. Daniel reacted fast. His fist shot forward, connecting with the man's jaw. The attacker stumbled, crashing into a row of seats. For a moment, the chaos stilled. The masked men regrouped, fury blazing in their eyes. But in the distance, faint sirens began to wail. The sound cut through the tension like a blade. The leader spat on the ground. Not worth it. Let's go. And just like that, the attackers scattered into the tunnels, their footsteps vanishing into the shadows. The station was quiet again. People peeked from behind benches, their eyes wide with shock. Whispers spread. Who is he? Did you see what he did? That man. He saved her. But Daniel wasn't listening. His chest heaved, his shoulder throbbed with pain, and his only thought was Lily. He turned quickly, scanning the benches until he saw her tiny face peeking out, tears streaming down her cheeks. She ran into his arms, clutching him with all her strength. He winced but held her tighter, whispering, I'm here. I'm right here. And then he felt another touch. The nurse. Her hands trembled as she reached for him, her voice barely a whisper. You risked your life for me, she said, eyes glistening with something deeper than fear. You didn't even know my name, and yet you stood for me. Daniel's throat tightened. He wanted to say it was nothing, that any man would have done the same. But he knew the truth. Not everyone would. She leaned in closer, her breath warm against his ear, and whispered words that would echo in his heart forever. The chaos had passed, but the echoes of fear lingered. The subway station, once a storm of screams, was now eerily quiet. People slowly crept out from their hiding places, eyes darting toward the man who had stood when no one else dared. Daniel Hayes, the tired mechanic, the single father, the man who refused to run. And a few strangers nodded at him with silent respect. Some whispered in awe, while others avoided eye contact, ashamed they hadn't done the same. But Daniel wasn't looking at them. His eyes were fixed on Lily, his daughter, who clung to his leg like her life depended on it. He knelt down, brushing her hair back with trembling hands. It's okay, sweetheart. It's over now, her little arms wrapped tightly around his neck. Don't do that again, Daddy. Don't leave me. The words pierced him deeper than any blade could. He kissed her forehead and whispered back, I'll never leave you. Not ever. Then, a shadow fell across them. It was the nurse. Her hands still trembled, her breathing uneven, her uniform stained from falling against the dirty floor. She stared at him like she was seeing more than just a man, like she was staring at a miracle. She knelt down beside him. You could have run, she said softly, voice breaking. You had a little girl to protect. No one would have blamed you. Daniel shook his head, his jaw set firm. I did protect her, he said. His eyes flickered toward Lily, then back to the nurse. And I protected you too. Because that's what fathers do. We stand. We fight. Even when the world says run, the nurse's eyes welled with tears. She reached out, her hand brushing his bruised shoulder, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. You saved me. But who saves you? The words struck like lightning. For a moment, Daniel had no answer. He had built his life on sacrifice, on giving everything without expecting anything in return. For years, he carried his burdens in silence, refusing to let anyone close enough to see the cracks. But now here was someone, a stranger, seeing right through him. Lily looked up at the nurse curiously, her small voice breaking the silence. Are you an angel? She asked innocently. The nurse blinked, taken aback. No, sweetheart, she whispered with a gentle smile. I'm just someone your daddy saved. But deep inside, she knew it wasn't the whole truth. He hadn't just saved her life. He had saved her faith. Faith that courage, kindness, and sacrifice still existed in a world that had long forgotten them. The police finally arrived, rushing into the station with weapons drawn, but it was already over. Statements were taken, witnesses questioned. The attackers had vanished into the night. Through it all, the nurse stayed close. She refused to leave Daniel's side, even as paramedics offered him help for his bruises. When the officer asked for her name, she answered clearly, Emily Carter. Then turning to Daniel, she added softly, And you? I don't even know your name. My hero Daniel hesitated for a moment, as if he'd forgotten what it was like to introduce himself. Daniel, he said at last. Daniel Hayes. Their eyes met. In that fleeting moment, amidst the broken glass and trembling voices of a subway station, something unspoken passed between them. A thread invisible, but undeniable. Neither of them understood it yet, but fate had just taken its first step. The days after the subway attack blurred together. For most, it became just another frightening news story that faded with time. But for Daniel and Lily, it lingered. Daniel's shoulder ached from the blow he had taken. His ribs were bruised, his knuckles sore. But he kept working, as he always did at the garage. Bills didn't stop just because heroes bled. Yet something was different now. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard her words. 3 days later, as Daniel adjusted the carburetor of an old sedan, he heard the creak of the garage door. He wiped the sweat from his brow and looked up. It was her, Emily Carter. She stood nervously in the doorway, holding a small paper bag. Her hospital uniform was gone. Now she wore a simple blouse and jeans, but her presence was unmistakable. Daniel froze, unsure of what to say. You found me, she offered a shy smile. You told me your name. That was enough. Besides, I couldn't just walk away after what you did. She stepped closer and handed him the bag. It's nothing fancy, just some homemade soup for your shoulder. Daniel stared at the bag in silence. No one had done something like this for him in years. He wanted to refuse, to protect the fragile walls he'd built around his heart. But before he could speak, a small voice interrupted. Daddy, who's that? Lily peeked from behind the workbench, her face smudged with grease, her curious eyes wide. Emily bent down, her smile gentle. Hi there. I'm Emily. Your dad helped me the other night. Lily tilted her head. Oh, you're the lady from the subway. Are you okay now? Emily's throat tightened, but she nodded. Yes, sweetheart. Thanks to your dad, I'm okay. From that day forward, Emily didn't disappear. She began stopping by after her shifts, sometimes with food, sometimes with nothing more than a kind smile. She learned about Lily's favorite bedtime stories, about Daniel's long hours at the garage, about the empty chair at their dinner table where a mother once sat. At first, Daniel resisted. His words were short, his walls tall. He'd grown too used to surviving alone. He didn't want to owe anyone, didn't want to hope for something that could be taken away. But Emily didn't push. She simply stayed. One evening, Lily tugged Emily's hand toward the living room. Will you read to me tonight? She asked, holding up her favorite storybook. Daniel started to protest. Lily, Miss Carter's had a long day. But Emily was already kneeling beside her. I'd love to. As Emily's soft voice filled the room, reading about castles and dragons, Daniel found himself standing in the doorway, watching. For the first time in years, Lily's laughter rang louder. freer, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt the heavy silence of his home soften. But that night after Lily fell asleep, Daniel found Emily washing dishes in the kitchen as if she belonged there. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. Emily looked up, her eyes steady. "I know." But I wanted. Daniel's chest tightened. The words scared him more than the subway attackers ever could. Want, need, belonging. He wasn't sure he could risk those things again. But deep down he knew. Emily wasn't just passing through his life. She was becoming part of it. And yet, Daniel also knew the world was never that simple. He had enemies he didn't even know. And sometimes, shadows from the past have a way of returning when you least expect them. Weeks passed since that stormy night in the subway. Life settled into a rhythm, but something had changed. Daniel felt it every time he saw Emily smile at Lily, every time she showed up with warm meals or helped with homework, every time the silence in his small apartment filled with laughter again. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to wonder, what if life didn't have to be so lonely? What if he didn't always have to stand alone? One evening, rain tapped against the window as Lily sat on the carpet drawing pictures. Emily read beside her, and Daniel leaned quietly against the doorframe, watching them. He thought back to all the years he had carried the weight by himself. The nights of hunger, the crushing bills, the tears he never let Lily see. He had built walls so high, convinced no one would ever climb them, but somehow this woman had. He whispered under his breath, almost afraid to say it aloud. Maybe she's the one who saves me. Suddenly, a knock echoed on the door, sharp, heavy. Daniel's instincts tensed. He opened it carefully, and there stood two officers. "Mr. Hayes," one asked. "The men from the subway, we caught them." Relief washed over him, but the officer's next words cut deep. "They mentioned your name, said you'd pay for stepping in. We think it's best you keep a low profile for a while." After they left, Daniel sat in silence, worry etched into his features. He looked at Lily, then at Emily. The shadows he feared were real. His choice that night hadn't just changed his life, it had painted a target on his back. He turned to Emily, his voice heavy. "You don't have to stay in this. It's dangerous now. My life. It's messy." Emily stepped closer, her hand finding his. Her eyes burned with quiet fire. "Daniel, I was there that night. I saw what you did. You stood when no one else did. You think I'm going to walk away now? Number, if you face shadows, then I'll face them with you." Lily looked up, her small voice breaking the tension. "Daddy, does this mean she's going to be part of our family?" Daniel froze, his throat tight, his eyes glistening. He looked at Emily, at the woman who had walked into his chaos without fear, at the woman who saw through his walls, at the woman who asked not just what he gave, but who gave back to him. For the first time in years, he let the walls crumble. He knelt beside Lily, pulling her close. "Maybe, sweetheart. Maybe she already is." Emily's tears fell freely as she whispered once more. The same words from that subway platform, but this time they carried a promise instead of a question. "I'll save you, Daniel. Every day for the rest of our lives." And so the story of a single dad who once stood alone became something more. A story of courage that sparked destiny. A story of sacrifice that led to love. A story of a man who saved others and finally learned how to be saved himself. Because sometimes fate doesn't just test us in the fire. Sometimes it delivers the family we never knew we needed.